Have you ever looked at a map and wondered what life is like on the other side of the world? Maybe you dream of studying at a famous university, or maybe you imagine yourself working in a glass tower in a city thousands of miles away. Pause for a moment and think about it. To make any of those dreams real, there's one thing you must have: the language of that place. But how do you prove you can speak it? How do you show a university, a hospital, or a future employer that you are truly ready? For a long time, this was a huge problem. People were moving across borders more than ever before. Students from Asia wanted to study in Europe. Doctors from Africa hoped to work in Australia. But there was no common standard, no shared way to measure English ability. There was no bridge. Each country, each institution, used its own system. It was like trying to measure the same table with 5 different rulers. Confusing, inconsistent, and often unfair. This is where IELTS begins. IELTS was not created to be a barrier or a punishment. It was created to be a bridge for dreams, for opportunity, for connection. Have you ever felt that a language barrier was like a wall standing in your way? The creators of IELTS wanted to turn that wall into a door. Their goal was simple but powerful: to create one system that treated everyone equally, no matter where they came from. So imagine the world 40 or 50 years ago. People were waiting, hoping, looking for a way to connect across borders. They needed a global standard, something fair, practical, and trusted. Tonight, we're going to travel back in time to see how that standard was built. We'll explore how one idea transformed the lives of millions. Are you ready to go back with me? Let's begin by looking at the world before IELTS existed. English testing before IELTS. A wild forest before modern IELTS. English testing was like a wild forest dance, confusing and unpredictable. Picture the 1960s and 1970s. If you wanted to study abroad, every university had its own rules. Some required long written essays. Others judged you through a short interview. There was no shared standard, no clear expectations. This meant one student could be good enough for one school, but rejected by another using a completely different test. Imagine how frustrating that must have been. You could study for months and still not know what to prepare for. You were walking in the dark. In the United Kingdom, one major test at the time was called the EPT-BETA, English Proficiency Test Battery. It sounded impressive, but it was deeply old-fashioned. The EPTB focused heavily on grammar rules and vocabulary from textbooks. It didn't really test whether you could hold a real conversation. It didn't check if you could understand a lecture or participate in a classroom discussion. In other words, it tested knowledge about English, not the ability to use English in real life. But the world was changing fast. People no longer needed English just to read books. They needed it to study, to work, to live. And by the late 1970s, it was clear: the old system was no longer enough. More and more international students were arriving in the UK and Australia, and teachers began to notice something worrying. Many of these students had excellent test scores. On paper, they looked perfect. But in the classroom, they struggled. They couldn't fully understand their professors. They found it hard to follow lectures, ask questions, or join discussions. The problem was clear. The old tests were failing everyone. They were failing the students and they were failing the schools. It was obvious that something had to change. We didn't need another exam full of grammar rules. We needed a test that treated English as a living, breathing language. At the same time, the demand for global mobility was growing like a flame. People wanted to cross borders in search of education, opportunity, and a better life, but they needed a fair and trusted way to prove their skills. Educational leaders around the world understood this. They realized it was time to stop testing knowledge about English and start testing real communication. This moment marked a major shift in how the world thought about language. The Genesis, a partnership for global communication. So where did the spark come from? It began with a partnership, 3 organizations coming together to solve a global puzzle. Think of them as 3 friends, each bringing a unique strength. Cambridge English Language Assessment contributed decades of expertise in language research and testing. The British Council brought global reach, with connections in countries around the world. And IDP Education Australia added the perspective of a fast-growing destination for international students. In 1980, their collaboration produced a new test called IELTS, English Language Testing Service. Notice something interesting. There was no I yet. At first, the test wasn't international in spirit, only in use. But the world was changing quickly. English no longer belonged to one country. It belonged to everyone who used it. The creators realized that this test could not represent a single nation. It had to serve the entire world. So they went back to work. They spent years researching, observing classrooms, and asking hard questions. What does a student truly need to survive and succeed in a new country? Then, in 1989, one small letter changed everything. Teihaded Teihai. The birth of IELTS. The birth of IELTS. The International English Linguistique. It was a powerful example of global cooperation. Imagine those early meetings. Experts from different continents sat around the same table. They didn't want a British test or an Australian test. They wanted a human test. They agreed that the exam should include a variety of accents. It shouldn't matter whether you learned English in London, New York, or Sydney. If you could communicate clearly and effectively, you should succeed. This was a bold idea at the time. Most language tests were rigid and overly strict, but IELTS chose realism over rigidity. Its goal was not perfection, it was communication. And with that vision, a true global standard was created. The 4 pillars: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. The creators of IELTS didn't simply put a test together at random. They built it on 4 strong pillars you already know well. Listening, reading, writing, speaking. But why these 4? Why not just one long exam? Think about your everyday life. You wake up and listen to the news. You read messages and emails. You write notes or replies. And you speak with friends, colleagues, and family. The designers of IELTS wanted the test to feel like real life. Their goal was simple. If you achieved a high score, you should be able to live in English, not just study it. They also understood that people have different dreams. Some want to enter universities and study demanding subjects like medicine or law. Others want to move to a new country to work, settle, or start a business. That's why IELTS offers 2 different paths. The academic module is a training ground for the mind. It tests your ability to understand complex texts and produce structured, formal writing. It's challenging, but it prepares you for the reality of higher education. The general training module, on the other hand, focuses on everyday life. It tests skills like reading a train schedule, understanding workplace notices, or writing a letter to a landlord. It's about surviving again, thriving in a new society. The human touch. Why speaking face-to-face matters. But perhaps the most important design choice of all was the speaking test. In many exams, you speak to a computer. It feels cold, mechanical, and unnatural. IELTS chose a different path. In IELTS, you always speak to a real person. Why? Because language is about people. The test is designed to see how you respond naturally, how you make eye contact, react to questions, and carry a real conversation. This human connection is one of the strongest foundations of IELTS. The exam was built to be fair, but also meaningful. It was never about tricking test takers. It was about revealing real ability. Every section of the test was carefully designed, timed, and monitored. The goal was consistency. That A score of 6.5 in Tokyo meant exactly the same as a 6.5 in Rio de Janeiro. This was the global standard they worked so hard to create. And once that standard was ready, it was time to introduce it to the world. IELTS goes global, spreading across continents. In the beginning, only a few institutions accepted IELTS. But slowly, like a sunrise, the light began to spread. During the 1990s, universities in the United Kingdom and Australia started to say, "We trust this test." They noticed something important. Students who performed well on IELTS also performed well in real classrooms. Then something big happened. Other countries began to pay attention. The United States, Canada, and New Zealand opened their doors to IELTS. Imagine the excitement of that moment. Suddenly, a single test could take you almost anywhere. No more taking 10 different exams for 10 different countries. One test, one standard, one global language passport. By the early 2000s, IELTS was growing faster than anyone had predicted. And it was no longer just for students. Governments began using IELTS for immigration. They realized that language ability was key to successful integration, and IELTS measured it better than any other test. Employers followed soon after. Global companies wanted proof that their employees could communicate with international clients and teams. An IELTS score became a badge of honor, a symbol of global readiness. Now, think again about the map of the world. Imagine small dots appearing across every continent. Each dot is an IELTS test center. From the snowy landscapes of Canada to the crowded streets of Mumbai, IELTS was there. By 2010, millions of people were taking the test every year. It had become the world's most popular English test for higher education and migration. It didn't matter what your first language was. Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Vietnamese, IELTS welcomed them all. It was no longer a British project. It was no longer an Australian project. It belonged to the student in a small village studying by candlelight. It belonged to the professional in a major city chasing a promotion. The wings of IELTS were wide enough to carry every one of those dreams. Evolution and modernization, adapting to a digital world. But my friends, the world never stands still. As time passed, technology began to reshape everything. We moved from handwritten letters to instant messages, from libraries to smartphones. IELTS knew it had to evolve too. But change came with a challenge. How do you modernize a global standard without losing the trust and quality that made it successful? For many years, IELTS existed only on paper. Candidates sharpened pencils, erased mistakes, and waited weeks for results to arrive by mail. Then came a turning point. The computer-delivered IELTS was introduced. And this was no small step, it was a giant leap forward. Ever wondered how an English test keeps up with our fast-changing world? Let's take a look at the journey of IELTS. Not too long ago, taking an English test meant one thing: a quiet room, a sharp pencil, and sheets of paper. But then, technology changed everything, and IELTS evolved with it. Introducing the computer-based test, suddenly, candidates could type their essays and get their results much faster. For many people who felt more confident with a keyboard than a pen, this was a dream come true. But here's what made IELTS different. They made a very wise decision. They didn't force everyone to switch to computers. The paper-based test remained. They understood that in many parts of the world, paper was still the most practical and trusted option. Choice and fairness mattered. And even as technology advanced, one thing never changed. The speaking test stayed face-to-face. No matter how modern the system became, IELTS recognized that real communication happens between people. Eye contact, tone, and reaction, these human elements, could never be fully replaced by a machine. This commitment to genuine interaction has always been at the heart of the test. The test content itself also continued to evolve. Outdated topics disappeared, making way for new themes that reflect our world. Today, things like the environment, technology, global society, and modern life. This ensures the test remains relevant and meaningful. Behind the scenes, IELTS never stopped listening. Teams of dedicated researchers carefully review every single question, constantly asking, is this fair? Is this clear? Does this truly test English ability? It's a process of continuous refinement. To improve access even further, IELTS introduced IELTS Online for selected candidates, allowing them to take the test from the comfort of their own home. It was another huge step toward inclusion, making the test more accessible than ever before. This is the evolution of IELTS. Think of it like a tree that grows new leaves each year, while keeping its roots deep and strong in the ground. IELTS adapts to a changing world without ever forgetting its core purpose: to be a fair, reliable, and trusted measure of language skill. It is a journey of continuous improvement. Just think about how much you've changed over the last 10 years. IELTS has changed to always striving to be a better partner on your journey. But let me tell you a little secret. IELTS is not really about the bands from 1 to 9. It is about what happens after you receive your score. It's about the lives that are transformed. Think of a young man named Carlos. He lives in a small town with big dreams. He studies hard and earns a 7.5 on his IELTS test. That single number opens a door he never thought possible. He receives a scholarship to study engineering in London, a city he'd only seen in movies. His life is forever changed. Now, think of a nurse named Amina. She's passionate about her work and wants to make a bigger impact. She scores a 7.0. Because of that result, she moves to Australia and begins saving lives in a hospital every single day, bringing her skills and compassion to a new community. For Carlos and Amina, IELTS wasn't just an exam. It was a turning point. It was the moment their world became much, much bigger. When we talk about the impact of IELTS, we are talking about millions of stories just like these, happening all over the globe. Every time someone opens an IELTS result envelope, their heart beats a little faster. That piece of paper represents months of effort, late nights of study, early mornings of practice. It carries the hopes of individuals, families, and entire futures. IELTS has helped people cross borders, share cultures, and connect with the world. It has allowed doctors to share medical knowledge, engineers to build better cities, and students to pursue their passions. So, the next time you hear about IELTS, remember it's more than just a test. It's a key, unlocking a world of opportunity. It's a bridge, connecting dreams to reality. It's a story of human potential, written one test, one score, one life at a time. Thank you for watching. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. When you sit in a classroom at an international university, take a moment to look around. You will see faces from every continent, different cultures, different stories. And yet, many of those people are there for the same reason you are. They passed the same test. IELTS connects us. It gives us common ground. It allows us to say to the world, I am ready to participate. I am ready to contribute. That is a powerful thing. A simple assessment can unlock doors that were closed for generations. It can break cycles of poverty and open paths to opportunity. So when you think about your IELTS journey, don't focus only on writing task 2 or true/false, not given questions. Think about the you who exists on the other side of the test, the places you will go, the people you will meet, the life you will build. That is the true impact of IELTS. Challenges, continuous improvement, and the future of IELTS. Of course, no global success story is without challenges. Being a world leader is never easy. Over the years, IELTS has faced criticism. Some say the test is too difficult. Others worry about cost. There are also concerns about security, about fairness, and cheating. The organizations behind IELTS take these concerns seriously. They listen. Every year, they invest millions in security systems, using advanced technologies such as biometric identification, fingerprint scans, and secure photography. Why? Because cheating is not just unfair to the system, it is unfair to the millions of candidates who study honestly. Protecting the validity of the test is a responsibility they take personally. They also work tirelessly to ensure reliability. This means that if you take the test on Tuesday and again on Thursday, your score should be nearly the same. That is incredibly difficult to achieve. Yet thousands of experts analyze the data behind every question. If a task is unclear or misleading, EDs from our quality always comes first. IELTS also works to support tests. They provide free preparation materials, sample tests, and instructional videos. Their goal is not to trap you but to help you succeed. They continue to adapt by offering more test dates, more locations, and more flexible options. They constantly ask themselves, how can we make this better for the candidate? They know the responsibility they carry. When a test can change lives, it must strive for excellence. Looking ahead, the road forward. The future of IELTS is about balance. It is about embracing new technologies like artificial intelligence, while protecting the human heart of the test. It is a journey guided by honesty. When challenges arise, they are acknowledged and addressed. That is how leadership is sustained for decades. As we sit here together, it feels like the sun is setting on our story. But for IELTS, the sun is always rising. The future points toward more personalized testing, smarter systems, faster and fairer assessment, greater access from every corner of the world. Yet the core mission will never change. IELTS will always be a bridge for students who want to learn For professionals who want to grow, for families searching for a new beginning, as long as English remains a global language, the world will need a trusted way to understand one another, and IELTS will be there to help make that connection. A final thought. Think about the legacy of this test. It has connected millions of people across hundreds of cultures. It has made the world feel smaller and kinder. So when you begin your own IELTS journey, remember this history. You are not just taking an exam. You are joining a long line of dreamers, builders, and achievers. You are walking a path millions have walked before you. And just like them, you have the power to cross that bridge. The air is cool now, and our story comes to an end. But your story is only beginning. Take a deep breath. Be proud of your ambition. The world is waiting to hear what you have to say, and IELTS is here to help you say it. Thank you for listening to this story of dreams, science, and connection. I wish you every success on your journey.